wanted to say welcome to everyone who's joining us by Zoom and by our Facebook group, the Black X Students of Texas. And so this is our chapter 3 in our trilogy of being Black in America. And so this one we thought should be about race and inequality moving forward in America. So just to let you know that Dr. Leonard Moore will join us around 6:30, but we are so happy to have Dr. Tiffany Tillis Lewis here, who is one of our own. I will start by introducing each panelist and moderator. The first one is Amanda L. Sargent. And a tidbit about Amanda is that I went to school with her older sister. So I remember when Amanda was born. So this is it's a bit fun for me to see her grow up to be a mature woman. So Amanda is a future readiness professional and currently serves on the DeSoto ISD School Board. She's a native of Dallas. She graduated from the University of Texas with a Bachelor's of Arts degree in African Diaspora Studies and completed her master's in social work in May of 2018 from UT Arlington. She was a member of Delta Xi chapter at Alpha Kappa Alpha. She was crowned Miss Black and Gold 2010. And she was the first Black homecoming queen. She studied abroad in Ghana, and she's dedicated herself to supporting students, communities, and to realize their potential through education and policy reform, as is evidenced in her professional engagement with the Dallas ISD, UT Division of Diversity and Community Engagement, and the Texas College Advising Court. She's also working with the Girl Scouts of Central Texas, Free Minds, and a Shaman Senior High School in Ghana. Her ultimate goal is to enhance the opportunities available to the youth, students, and families of diverse populations. Ms. Sargent aims to extend her passion for youth and community development as an advocate for high quality education and accountability. Welcome. Our next panelist is Dr. Tiffany Tillis Lewis. She received all 3 of her degrees from UT, which is a BA in psychology, a master's in higher education, and a PhD in higher education administration. Currently, she was just promoted to assistant vice president. Congratulations. And she's the director of Longhorn Link program. Before that, in 2006, she joined the Longhorn Center for Academic Excellence and led faculty and staff mentoring program, the ACE program, and served as program coordinator and assistant director and director of the Gateway Scholars. In addition to her work with Gateway Scholars and Longhorn Link, she's part of the leadership team of Fearless Leadership Institute, which she helped found in 2013. Dr. Lewis is the director of Longhorn Link program, which is a federally funded TRIO student support services program. The primary goal of this program is to increase the college retention and graduation rates of its participants and facilitate the process of transition from one level of higher education to the next. This program takes a holistic approach to preparing the students by providing students with the academic support, leadership development, and enrichment opportunities. In her role, she is responsible for the academic success of students, which include managing the tutoring services, mentoring, and coaching. Next, we have Marlon D. Whitley. He's a senior attorney in the Office of the Corporate Secretary at the United States Automobile Association. Marlon was previously the senior counsel of Ghost Management Group. It's a pre-IP technology infrastructure company based in Southern California. Prior to joining the aforementioned corporate legal departments, Marlon was a corporate and securities partner in the Houston office of Reed Smith, LLP, an international law firm where he also served as the firm's hiring partner and the first executive director at diversity recruiting. He has a number of articles addressing diversity and inclusion in higher education and legal profession in particular. He has served on numerous community boards as well as serving as a director and coach on youth leagues boards. He's a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin, where he received his Bachelor of Arts in African and African American Studies and served as president of the student body. I remember serving as a volunteer on your campaign, Marlon. Marlon received his Doctor of Jurisprudence from the University of Texas School of Law. He currently splits his time between Houston and Los Angeles, California, with his wife, Julia, an accomplished lawyer and partner at Hunton Andrews Kurth. He is the proud father of 3 sons, Jackson, Jordan, and Jameson, and 1 daughter, Sloan Malia. Dr. Moore will join us later, and but I won't hold up the panel. So Amanda, it's all yours.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Sadler, as well as Bess, the Black ex-students of Texas, and anybody else that's joining on today. Thank you so much for really having a platform to engage about different things and moving forward in America. And so this particular chapter 3 is race and inequality. So what I first want to pose to our panelists tonight is just a one-word check-in. You know, it is a pandemic going on, as normal as people want it to be, but how are you all doing? You know, let's do a one-word check-in and kind of tell us why you feel that way, especially being a Black person in America. Oh, I can't hear you, Tiffany. You're muted, Tiffany.
Can you hear me?
Now we can, yeah.
I'm exhausted, quite frankly and honestly. I've had to really peel back from social media and the news. I just feel like I'm being re-traumatized over and over and over and over again. So if I had to put it into one word, I'd just say exhausted.
All right, we got exhausted on the table. Marlon Whitley, how are you doing? What is your one-word check-in, being a Black person in America in the middle of a pandemic? Let's check in with us. How are you doing?
I have to co-sign Tiffany's sentiment. For the longest time, my avatar on social media was tired, 1619 2020. That's no surprise for those who are kind of familiar with the history of Black and Black Americans in this country. I will say it does seem that the COVID pandemic has forced the country to kind of sit and watch. And in the midst of all of that, I think that a lot of the unrest that's taken hold has forced people into thinking critically in ways they haven't had to before and acting in ways they haven't been moved to before. So to the extent that I'm tired, I'm also optimistic that something good will come out on the other side of this.
Awesome, awesome. Just to volunteer my own one-word check-in, I would have to say I'm constantly thinking about legacy, and that's just a short way of saying self-preservation. You know, the air is literally, you know, killing people. In addition to anything else going on, being a Black person in America on any given day, there have been so many limitations dropped on this entire country, the universe at this point. Everybody on the globe is dealing with the pandemic, but definitely thinking about what does this mean for not only my family, not only myself. I'm kind of filtering everything that I do through the eyes of priority. You know, do I have to go there? Do I have to be a friend and show up in person? Can you take this phone call and just text me back? You know, do I have to go to church to show that I love God, or can I do that by clicking live, you know, for church at home? So I think a lot of things have been put back in perspective as far as, you know, what am I doing now, and is that going to affect my next? So legacy would be, you know, what's been on my mind, in addition to being tired and exhausted, as you all have already mentioned. One of the things that I do want to state, I know it's called race and inequality, but I do think it's important to also speak to equity as well, just because, you know, there is a difference between equality and equity. So we're also going to be addressing both of those things as we tackle this topic as far as moving forward between race relations and being Black in America. So the first question, I guess, beyond that is just going to be about symbolic victories, right? I'm reminded of a quote by Malcolm X, just to paraphrase it, you know, a white man will try to satisfy you with symbolic victories rather than the economic equity and real justice. You know, and so we're kind of in a situation where different corporations are making statements. You have kneeling in kente cloth. You have Black Lives Matter painted on the streets. And it's just so many things going on as to support Black Lives Matter, the movement. But I mean, what is that really? I mean, is it actually getting us to where we want to be? So what are your thoughts about that?
For me, I think, well, I'm just jumping in, Marlon. I don't know if you were going to go, but I'll go ahead. I think the symbolic, what you call them, victories are nice, right? But they are not sufficient, right? So it's nice to have them because they are outward expressions of organizations making changes or stating that they want to make change and move and make progress. But we all know that in order to make real progress, and the progress that we would like to see is for major corporations to assess the inequities, right? The equity gaps within the organization. So being intentional about hiring and promotion, making sure that the pipelines into these organizations, that your internships or your apprenticeships are representative of folks across ethnic groups, right? Or and other groups. I think it's also important for organizations to check and evaluate the types of their philanthropic activities, right? Their charitable giving. All of these things are really important, and that's the real change I think that all of us probably want to see these corporations make. And so, like I said, the symbolic victories are nice. I feel like they do serve their purpose, but coupled with that, we need to be making sure that these organizations are making real change from within. And I'm just tired of organizations pretending like they know, like they know. If you knew, we would see change and this not would be happening. So I think it's okay for organizations to say, we don't know what we're doing. We acknowledge that there's problems and gaps, and we want to bring in professionals to help us do that. And so I think that's where your D&I professionals come in, your diversity, equity, and inclusion folks come in. We have our sister Mandy and her company with Canaries that are doing really great work to come in and assess organizations, talk to employees, and then of course report back to the organizations kind of what their blind spots may be, so that they can then move in a direction where they can make real systemic change from within. So they're nice, but not sufficient.
Awesome, Marlon.
No, and I agree with Tiffany. I think we need to be careful as we kind of navigate this path and this movement of social and civil unrest, and really understand and recalibrate to some extent to make the masses understand what's being asked for. Recall that a lot of what you see in terms of activism, in terms of protest, started with protesting the continued murder of unarmed Black people at the hands of law enforcement. And as a result of that, Aunt Jemima's gone. We no longer have Uncle Ben's on the box of rice, and been a number of symbolic gestures. But the initial plea, the initial outcry was to have people to stop killing us. And so I am all for companies, taking an introspective look at themselves and finding out ways to address their gaps and blind spots with respect to diversity initiatives. But I liken it in some respects to buying a house. And even if you ever purchase a house, you know that you can slap a coat of paint on the walls and plant some flowers in the garden. But if there's an infestation that's at the foundation, the house is no good, and the house needs to be torn down to its studs and rebuilt. And a lot of what needs to be done, particularly if we're talking about tackling and dismantling systemic and institutional racism, is tearing these systems down to their studs and doing a complete rebuild, and a rebuild with the focus of equity and equality at the core of the rebuild. All too often, in the past, we've had a few bones thrown at us here. We'll get, a VP for diversity, or we'll bring in a consultant, and it provides for a feel-good moment without holding the institutions to any level of accountability for root causes of their practices and the things they need to change. And so, I am over the symbolism. I don't want this movement to be commercialized in much the same way that Kwanzaa has been, because people see a way to capitalize from a dollars perspective. But I'm really more interested in organizations like Netflix, who've made significant financial commitments to put monies into Black banks, which build Black communities and Black businesses. And me, when you're addressing systemic problems by providing the resources for communities to build, that's when you see the real change.
That's awesome. Now, I kind of want to move further on that before we go to our next question, because you both hinted at what is the root and what is the systemic issues that we see. I'm of the opinion, and I'm only speaking for myself, that the real issue that we're kind of dealing with is not racism. And I know that's like, what do you mean by that? I think that racism is something that we kind of latched onto, but the real culprit is anti-Blackness. I think that we have a solve for racism. I think we know that, race is, socially constructed thing. It doesn't really exist, but we feel the symptoms of it. So when you're thinking about how people are approaching the symbolic victories, it can never get to the root cause because we're not willing to call it what, the fact that, and again, I'm coming from a lens of education now because I work primarily with through 12th grade, and you hear the pipeline to prison and things like that. And I think it's ironic that a lot of the resources or reform is at the university. That's if they get there. We're still trying to figure out how can we get everybody third grade reading met, because that is what is going to turn into a bed in prison. But there is no money or policies in the education world that says we need to fund Black literacy. You have bilingual education funded pre-K through 12, but there is no money outside of kindergarten and pre-K programs that is specific towards African-American communities. So I think we have to think in terms of policy, because policy can then drive action. And then that's already kind of an inherent accountability system. Marlon, you brought up police. About, of course, we're talking about defunding the police. There's been enough community efforts to kind of provide oversight to police officers, but immunity is still on the table for 49 states. So when you talk about killing, but we're not putting anything in place, I think that we have to, again, start thinking about systemically, what is that issue? What is the root cause of that issue as well? Because, we can all be sad about Aunt Jemima Fox no more, Uncle Ben. So just a thought. And you mentioned also about putting your money where your mouth is, right? So this next question, I do want to shout out to the previous panel on race and economics and building wealth, Samitra Goodson, Erica Brown, and Kevin Knight, and their panel that they did a couple of weeks ago. But what are your thoughts of reparations in terms of one of America's avenues to kind of closing the poverty gap and providing resource and giving Black Americans their due because of the enslavement of our ancestors? So kind of what are you on reparations?
Where am I on?
I
read an article just this week about a city in North Carolina where the town city council voted for measures that provide investment level measures that address reparations. It was a very kind of unique and outside the box approach, but what was interesting, if you look at the picture of the councilman, it was a pretty diverse mix. You had African Americans, you had white women on the city council. And for me, I think that gesture accomplished two things. One was the acknowledgement and ownership of the injustices that even made the measures necessary in the first place. So that's the start. And when you think about the history of this country, whether it's the Japanese internment camps or Native Americans that were subject of genocide and had their lands taken away, for every group or ethnic group, save African Americans, that have suffered some mass atrocity in this country, it's been redressed in some form, in some economic form. Now you can debate whether or not the economics of it were sufficient enough, but nonetheless, there was some economic redress and remuneration for those past transgressions. And nowhere in the history of this country can you stop and see a pivotal moment where the injustices committed against and still being committed against African Americans have been addressed in any meaningful, significant measure. And now you can argue that the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, or the 13th Amendment, but mind you, people had to be brought to the table kicking and screaming, and even still, there's nuances within the 13th Amendment, if you've seen the documentary on Netflix, that still provide a loophole to kind of satisfy the prison industrial complex that disproportionately affects Black communities. So having said that, the country needs a reckoning first and an acknowledgement, and part of me hopes that this latest phase of civil unrest will bring about that acknowledgement. But the second part of that is the economic redress, and the town in North Carolina has at least paved the way in terms of providing some type of a context or guideline, if you will, and as a way to provide some type of economic measures to bring about the much needed change and the much needed redress, but also as a way to kind of close the gaps, the wealth gap, the economic gaps that exist as a result of years and if you will centuries of disproportionate and unequal and unjust treatment for Black Americans.
Awesome. Some good insight. Good insight. Dr. Tiller?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that Marlon just said. And every point that I would have made, he just said. But I did want to say, if the question is whether or not I agree that we should have reparations or that some plan for reparations should be in place, the answer is yes. Yes. And in my opinion, in what form, I think towards our institutions. So for instance, investing in small business or Black businesses, period, Black financial institutions, historically Black colleges. Those are the types of institutions I think we should be directing reparations to. So in hindsight, and just putting it out there, yes, I agree. And I feel like if people are still struggling with whether or not African Americans in this country deserve reparations, we just need to go back to the history books. Ta-Nehisi Coates just put out a wonderful article in The Atlantic called "The Case for Reparations." So if you have not seen that, just Google it. It was a wonderful account, historical account of basically the systemic denial of Black folks since slavery, and all of the reasonings for why reparations should be absolutely something that we are deserving of. And so if I had to just point out a resource for people to go and check out, that is one of many, but that is the latest one that I feel that really, really did a great job of characterizing a case for why we are basically deserving of reparations.
Definitely. I again, where is my check? I'm waiting on it.
We're not talking about checks now, Amanda.
Well, honestly, I think it needs to come in the form of a check, and here's why. We've all been affected by COVID-19, and I saw a stimulus check go out, and I saw that major corporations receive bailouts, and I saw that everybody's been applying for PPP loans. And there was a lag of information to communities of color. And it was like, oh, well, we still got some money left. So I guess, Black businesses, y'all can apply too. And I just think that it's very interesting that I wouldn't accept somebody spending my money for me. And maybe because the generation that I've been able to see. So my actual grandfather was born in 1900, right? And my grandmother was born in 1906. So when you're thinking about the fact that my grandparents grew up on a plantation, my father picked cotton, he's a 74-year-old African-American man. He served in the military. And some of the accolades he was able to get, the redlining in the housing market, the VA loans, all of these type of things were denied throughout the system, post. So I'm like, we're not even passing down wealth. So yeah, institutions, buildings, great. Even go to those buildings now because of Corona. So I'm just thinking, if you really want to jumpstart the, economics, if you want to pay off student loans, do all that, but just like you cut for stimulus and you weren't asking, well, where are you spending? Here's a, that for food and all this other stuff. I feel like there should be no limitations and it should be a check. That's just me. Again, we all agree that yes, something should. but I don't think that there needs to be any oversight on how that's spent. But that's just, again, this is the generational thing right here. But that's just that. I know that will be joining us soon, and one of the questions I would love to have his input on. So I will kind of double back to end police brutality. And of course, we're still waiting on justice for Breonna Taylor and a number of other things. And so the question kind of surrounding that for me right now is thinking about moving forward in America, because that, again, is the basis of this conversation. What system do you think should be in place to aid officers in identifying cops who don't live up to their oath? And what do you, and a second part to that would kind of be, what is a barrier, or what barriers do you see in police reform efforts, as far as I fear for my life or excessive force that we've seen typically happen to Black people in America concerning brutality? Do I need to ask it again? Let me know.
I just want to make sure I understand the question. So what should be in place to aid officers in identifying cops who do not live up to their oath? Okay.
Yes, so fellow cops, or the idea of barriers that may exist in police reform. Yes.
That is tough. Wow, that's a good question. Me personally, I don't really know a lot about what happens in the hiring process when someone goes to apply to be a police officer. But the hierarchies within police departments, I feel that that is one of the barriers that keeps cops from holding one another accountable. So a lot of the accounts of the latest George Floyd case, and I forget his name, but the other African-American cop that has recently been charged, right? He was saying that he feared retaliation if he would have said something to his superior, Mr. Chauvin. I guess that's Chauvin, I don't know how to pronounce that. But, and so I don't know how you would do it, but we clearly need to dismantle some levels within the police department so that people who are new cops and folks who have just gotten into the system are able to reject or basically speak up. So that's one thing. And then also, I don't know, when cops get hired, do they have to go through a psychological assessment? Is that a part of the hiring process? It may be for some, but maybe that's one across the board measure. Not that it will reveal everything, but it may give us some insight into people's level of just, rationalness. Are you rational? Do you have compassion? Do you, just simple things that may throw up red flags and may determine that that person is unfit to be in this particular field. So those are a couple of things that I've been thinking about that we should look into and think about. I feel like the training, varies, right? So there's some districts and some municipalities that do a great job with making sure they are training officers, and then there's some that are not. So that too, I feel like should be consistent. There should be some type of regulatory standard that police departments have to follow in terms of training and preparation for officers when they're supposed to be on the beat, right? So that's just kind of some preliminary thoughts about that question, not knowing a lot about how police officers are hired or trained. Quick thing, Dr. Moore is asking for the link to get into the call. So if someone could send that to him.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Sorry, Marlon.
You're fine. No, I was going to add to Tiffany's comment. You know, about a month ago, I was at my doctor's office here in Houston at Methodist, and while sitting there, my doctor's a early 70-year-old white man, and unsolicited, he brought up the George Floyd murder and talked about police unsolicited, and to me, it suggested, you know, a few things, not the least of which that this has been weighing on his mind. Now think about it, this is a 70-year-old white man who was advocating for police reform because of yet another unarmed Black man had been murdered. And in the course of the conversation, you know, we talked about a few things, but one of the chief takeaways from the conversation was that when you think about police officers, think about them in the same realm as doctors. And these are people who, you know, like it or not, have the power of life and death in their hands. But when you contrast to training, doctors go through, you know, a 4-year undergraduate program, you know, in many cases, 4 years of medical school, and then several more years of a residency program before they are, you know, trusted, you know, or entrusted to the public to provide services for the greater good. With police officers, it's a minimum hour of requirements in the academy, but nowhere near the level of training and detailed training and forethought you would think that would go into a profession for someone who has the power of life and death in their hands, and people who have to make, you know, split-second decisions. And so you can't treat and continue to treat the hiring and training of police officers as just another civil service for municipalities and metro areas. You really have to give some more meaningful thought into who you're hiring and how you are preparing them to engage with the greater public. You know, Chris Rock, I think, for better or for worse, you know, really, you know, shed light on this when he said that, you know, the bad apples argument needs to go out the window because there's certain professions where you can't have bad apples. You know, he said airline pilots, for instance. You know, he said, you know, most of our pilots know how to land a plane, but, you know, just a couple of them that, you know, crash in the mountains every once in a while. And that's unacceptable. And I think about myself as an attorney. I'm held to a high standard, both in an ethical sense and in a practical sense, in that if I engage in some type of behavior in the course of my profession that is outside the bounds of ethics or causes harm or some damage to someone or something, I'm held accountable. You know, my bar license is at risk, and you know, my ability to practice in this profession and have a livelihood provided for my family is at stake. And so, you know, with each engagement and client engagement, that's always at top of mind. And I think that same level or that same standard should be there for the people to whom we entrust the public safety to. And I mean, this conversation about police brutality and the abuse of power really is deserving of its own, webinar or town hall. But suffice it to say that when I was talking about, you know, foundations that or institutions that need to be torn down to their studs, if you know and understand the history of policing in this country and how they evolved from the slave catchers, it really causes you to think, wait, this is probably one of those professions and one of those institutions that probably needs to be ripped down to its studs and rebuilt. And one of the ways we can do that is by observing other countries who have significantly lower levels of engagements, of violent engagements between the police and the general public. And I think there's a correlation with guns and the availability and the proliferation of guns there. Again, probably a conversation for another topic, but it really goes down to who you're hiring and how you're preparing them to engage in their profession.
Awesome. Thank you so much on that. I agree with you. It should be its own separate entity. So let's take note of that. I do agree with that. Welcome, Dr. Moore. Welcome to Nice Trilogy. We're talking about and inequality and moving forward as Black people in America. So again, welcome, greetings to you. Right now, we were actually talking about police brutality, police reform. How can we support officers who recognize, bad apples in the organization, or just what can be done from a community standpoint to kind of give oversight to that. So if you wanted to answer that, please.
I can give a UT perspective. Would that be helpful?
Sure.
Okay. I don't know if y'all know Chief Carter. He's the chief of UTPD. He used to be with Austin PD. He's implemented a number of major reforms within UTPD within the last couple of years. Just this year, I sat on a committee of people to basically help them select either sergeants or captains, but high-ranking positions. And it was me, a Latino police chief from Pflugerville, and they flew in this white brother from DC. And 80 to 90% of the questions that we grilled them on were all about race and community policing and community relations. So he's doing some dynamic stuff. The UTPD Police Oversight Committee has a new charge. It's going to be expanded. It'll have 2 or 3 community members added to the committee now. They will meet monthly. I think now they meet once or twice. And I may be speaking out of turn, but I believe Professor Kevin Coakley will be chairing that UTPD Police Oversight Committee. Dr. Coakley teaches in the College of Education. He's a psychologist. And also we got Caden Stearns from the football team on that committee too. So I think the president wants that committee to have a lot more teeth. And I think hopefully we'll start seeing a lot more oversight just in terms of UTPD.
Awesome. I also thank you for giving that information about because I think when students are away from home and they want to feel safe, there's a hesitance when they're back home in their own personal communities with calling the police. I know here in Dallas, there have been a number of incidents where Black people were harmed. And so I think one of the things that to see from a policy standpoint is just requiring a certain percentage of the police force to live in the community because that you would be less likely to use excessive force if you knew you had to go to the grocery store with that person's grandmother or that person's cousin. You would think twice before pulling a gun because, they might live down the street. That also think about the fact that these are tax-paid positions. You're paying somebody you can't even trust to have your back in protection. So I just think from a very, if we're thinking about reform, because I know defund the police has been something that has been all over social media. Definitely in some cities, they have successfully done that. Not necessarily abolishing the police, but just not allowing them to have as much freedom with funding. So I do think that kind of having a community oversight or asking those hard questions, because you really have to get to the root of why is this person in this position. Marlon, you did a great job hitting on the historical factor of paddy rollers and slave catchers and kind of how that has evolved into today's modern day police. But I'm just thinking about the hesitation to call needed and then being on the other end of that. So and
I'll say this, Amanda, some of the students are even demanding, they had it in their proposal that every time somebody calls the police, it doesn't need a police response, so they're asking UT to hire some counselors, some mental health people, because often police escalate the situation. So I think the students have been very, very thoughtful and strategic with what they are asking for and demanding.
Awesome. And I agree with that. As a master social worker, that has been a new trend. They are actually pairing social workers with police departments to escalate some of those situations that don't require a gun to resolve. So that is definitely on the right path for that as well. Again, thank you, Dr. Moore, for being on the call, because we all received an email this past Monday that went out to all Texas from the interim president, a more diverse and welcoming campus. The items can relatively be summed up in 2 categories: recruitment and retention of talented and diverse students and faculty. And secondly, reconsidering campus values in the form of symbols, names, and the full disclosure of history. So we kind of talked about symbolic victories and how Malcolm X kind of gave us, does it really address the issue? So I do want to point out that in email, it was mentioned that the Eyes of Texas will remain the school song. And shout out to IBGC Innovations Gospel Choir one time for singing the remix of the Eyes of Texas, but I move on. And that this email was also signed by every member of the cabinet, which I think is huge as well. So here's the question. Is it enough? Okay, is it enough? Does it address the heart of the concerns of Black students of Texas currently, former, past, and future?
Who wants to take a stab at that? Me or who?
I think you should start it as one of the signatures.
Go ahead, Dr. Moore.
Let us hear from you.
Let me say this. Some people my age think symbols aren't important, all right? I argue differently, because if they weren't important, these folks would have not put up Confederate statues in the first place, and they wouldn't be fighting, preventing you from taking them down. So let me say, I think that stuff is vital. I think when it's all said and done, we have 4 statues of Black folks now. You'll have Julius Whittier, you'll have Heman Sweat, and then that whole East Mall project for the precursors, which will run $4 to $5 million, all right? That area from the King statue all the way down to that fountain. So I think that stuff is significant. I think the multi-million-dollar investment from athletics is significant for 2 reasons. Number one, the student athletes they wanted that money. They didn't want that money to come from the regular student body fund. They wanted athletics to put up money since they were generate so much. And then secondly, Ted Gordon's faculty diversity plan is phenomenal. So to have all that happen at one time, I think is historic. I think it is groundbreaking. But I told the students, I think we've done enough with statues and stuff. I think we've done enough with that. We have to deal with the substantive issues. And I've been telling students, and this is why we got to make sure Black students are speaking for Black students. The biggest threat to diversity on that campus is not scholarship money. The biggest threat is going to soon be the lack of off-campus housing. And that is creeping up on us as we speak. When they tear down Riverside, you got West Campus or west of campus, and you're going to have Black kids living out in Bastrop, living out Del Valley, and in Manor. And that's going to, and so my job, I want to get the students to start thinking about long-term structural issues that have the potential to impact Black enrollment even more. Do I think it's enough? I don't think it's never enough, but I think in terms of what happened at one time. I mean, look at A&M. They got that one little Sto Ross Confederate statue, and they said, we ain't bringing him down, all right? So I want to give Jay Hartzell a lot of credit, because he really had to thread a needle there, between that Eyes of Texas piece and meeting the demands of Black students.
All right, thank you, Dr. Moore, for giving us side. And someone even said, preach, Dr. Moore. All right, so let's hear from our other 2 panelists. What are your thoughts on it?
It's never going to be enough, and to me, so this whole debate about the statues, right? Being a student there 20 plus years ago, we had these same arguments and demands on the administration. I can pull files from the MIC where we had a proposal in 1995 to create an office for the VP of diversity, in which the administration said, no, that will never happen. Diversity is everybody's job. 10 years later, we end up with a vice president for diversity and community engagement. So the seeds have been planted a long time ago, and this reaping and the harvest has come several years too late. So to me, what that suggests is that in all the years that predate even my time at the university, where people were fighting for the things that came to fruition in my time, the things that we're fighting for during my time as a student now come to fruition as these students' time. Yeah. There's a backlog of progress at the university. What was that, Dr. Moore?
No, I like it. You said a backlog. I got to use that, a backlog of progress, right?
There is a backlog that's just now being filled. And so, in as much as we can get excited, and celebrate, these racist caricatures coming down, it really doesn't speak to the heart of the issue, which is creating a campus environment where people from all walks of life, particularly people from marginalized communities, can walk into the campus and know that irrespective of the campus's racist past and history, that a new leaf has been turned over, and there are resources on the campus to make sure that the 4% of students that we have African Americans can grow and double in size over a period of time. To me, one of the most disheartening statistics about UT, and it has nothing to do with the statues. And although Dr. Moore brings up an excellent point about housing, the fact that the enrollment of Black students has remained so consistent, hovering between 3.5 to 4 or 5% for really the last 30 years, is really an indictment on the university of the first class that's supposed to serve the state of Texas. And so, the statues coming down are great symbolic victories, but as many have pointed out, the real heart of the matter is transforming the mission of the university into one that students from Third Ward, Fifth Ward, or South Dallas, or rural communities, or wherever, can come on campus and find a place for them, so they can get the education that is that they're deserving of, and then take those educations back to the communities to make sure that the pipeline is there. So I'm all for, and I'm satisfied about the statues coming down. The T.S. Painter Hall, I still take issue with, having gone to the law school there. I can recall, in my first year of law school, I had them remove the bust of Colonel Simpkins out of the law school, and just recently had to explain to one of the detractors for the football players' efforts that the first Black athletes were housed in Simpkins dormitory on campus, which is really an affront, if you think about it, to the whole idea of integrating the campus in the first place. And so there's a lot that has been done, but a lot more that needs to be done to not only address kind of the past history, but also provide the hope for the future opportunities for communities of color. Like I said, to create those pipelines so that 4% number can double and triple in size over the coming years.
Awesome. Dr. Tillis?
For me, no, it's not enough. And I'm going to go back and say, I want to harp on the scholarship money and the funding, because I think it's important. We lose a lot of talent from Texas. I mean, we get a lot of great students that do come to Texas, but, we lose a lot of talent to schools that are willing to pay for Black students to come and study at their institutions. And so that's important for that reason. And then the second reason that's important is because, again, I heard what Dr. Moore said about the housing crisis that's about to ensue. And in order for people to be able to afford to come to Texas and to live in Austin, they're going to need that additional income. So my fight and all of my energy is invested in the long-term investment for scholarship monies for the students. So, we put a lot of money as a university into a lot of other students on this campus. And I feel like, our students are worth that as well. And so I think the onus is on the university, but then also on the colleges. If the colleges say that they want to be the best and they want to have the best and the brightest, you have to invest. And I know UT has this, this hang up about recruiting students because they feel like, UT is UT and they come in anyway, right? But that's not necessarily true for our community. And for our kids. And so I think that we are really missing out on, that's a huge part of the puzzle that we have to address. And I know that the university will come back and say, well, look, we have Texas Advance. That's one of the newer scholarship programs that covers full tuition for middle to low income students. And then we also got the Big Dale grant. But the thing about the Dale money is that it will eventually run out. And so we still have to do our work to make sure that, we keep the coffins full and that students have access to those funds beyond, the expiration of the Dale money. So I think it's important. It should not be overlooked. It's good now, but if we want to continue to, make progress and continue to see those numbers go up, and for students to feel like they have a place here at UT, we have to address the money situation.
Yes, ditto to all of those things. Up until recently, I was with UT Outreach Dallas and leading the efforts here on recruiting those students. And it's very true. You know, you are talking about recruiting the best and the brightest, and money does come up because they are comparing scholarship offers. They do see that somebody else is putting money behind their there. And so I definitely think creating that pipeline would give you more Black ex-students of Texas. And then making sure that there's money given to the organizations that are on campus. Because I know in addition to housing, I think that is a huge aspect of it as well. But I do think that just investing in student organizations so that they can find a place, they do want to come back, they don't, you know, choose to go somewhere else. When they come to visit and see campus for themselves, they can see a reflection of themselves, because that's another piece of it as well. So I definitely echo all of your sentiments as it relates to that.
And Amanda, you did a great job, you know, and I know you were frustrated when you recruit students for a year or two and at last minute TCU comes through with a community scholarship, you know, and you're like, Doc, what y'all got? I'm like, if they ain't poor, we ain't got nothing. So my charge to this group, hold the Texas Exes accountable. They've been giving lip service. I've been here since '07, and they've been giving lip service every single year. Dr. Moore, what can we do? I sent them a plan. You know, what's the word when somebody don't respond to you? You get ghosted. What's the word, Amanda? Ghosted?
Yes, you can say ghosted, yes.
You know, but they need to be held accountable. They need to have a campaign to raise non-need-based money for African-American students. But I don't think we've ever put enough pressure on them to do that.
But you know, Dr. Moore, you bring up a great point, and I know we got to move on, but I have to say this because we typically want to say that Black equals poor. Right. We want to say that Black equals low test scores, or, you know, something of that nature. And it's very frustrating because you have Black students are deserving of scholarship money, but because their parents didn't go or know the back, you know, network, then they're not able to come on those connections alone, and then the money becomes a factor. So I think that all of that needs to be unconditional. If this is a student that we want, regardless of what the household income is, because if we're honest, a lot of times in African American households and money, thank you, babe, and money, that money is split up between other households. That's not all the money coming into the house. So I think, you know, we talked about wealth gap and reparations and things of that nature. So I do think that needs to be a part of that story as well. Which brings up another point. All right. So let's talk about Black exceptionalism and the talented 10. Okay.
That's Black UT right there.
Well, hey, that's good. But I also want to throw Black privilege in there as well. Okay, well, let me back up. So are we looking to certain people to step up and lead and carry the rest of us in 2020? So let me bring it back to our current state. We're talking about moving forward in America. Are we still looking for certain people to step up and lead us and carry the rest of us? And is that harmful to Black progress overall? Okay. I know that was a loaded question, but I'm asking all the time. So when we're thinking about Black exceptionalism and the talented 10, and I even want to throw out the phrase Black privilege, when we're thinking about those things, are we still looking for certain people to carry the rest of us? And is that hindering Black progress overall?
You know, I'm curious, Amanda, your comment about Black privilege. Can you explain that a little bit? Because I want to.
All right. I think, you know, Dr. Moore, he's joking about it, but it's real. You know, as a Black person that has graduated from UT Austin, there is a certain level of tokenism that is expected of you. Because one, how did you get there? Oh, you finished? Oh, you got a degree? You got the paper? Oh, all that comes with it. But I'm often thinking about if we're ever in a position of power, are we more compliant to hold on to the position, even though that will hinder change down the line? And I'll give you an example. One thing that I read recently regarding Central Park Karen, her name is Amy Cooper. She called the cops on Christian Cooper, who was a Black man bird watching in Central Park because he told her to put a leash on the dog, right? And in this particular situation, shout out to the governor of New York one time, he was like, hey, we're gonna have a law to say that you cannot do false calls to the police on Black people. You cannot weaponize the police for something that is not happening or your suspension. Because we know that until we clean up the police department, that is distance. We know that. Christian Cooper came back and said he wanted to err on the side of compassion and not move forward with that. So in my opinion, that is an example of Black privilege, and here's why. Because just because you came out of that situation alive does not mean the next person is going to have the same grace. That can be said about the Starbucks situation. Oh, we're going to sue Starbucks for $1. Or that can even go to brutality. We here in Dallas, Bo Jean, the lady who was on Amber Geiger, who was actually convicted of murder. They only gave her 10 years because we want to err on the side of forgiveness. It's almost as if we want to have a sense of visible safety as Black people to maintain privilege because it gets us something. But our children's children may not have that benefit. Our cousin may not have that privilege. I know for myself as an elected official, depending on what my hair looks like, changes how people treat me, right? So how is it that I can say I want to advocate for Black girls in different spaces when I have the opportunity to call it out? I don't, because I want to protect my privilege. So that's a little background on Black privilege. I know a lot, probably more than what you was asking for, but back to the question. What are your views on the Talented 10th in the year 2020 as far as moving us forward? Is that model helping us today, or is it hindering us today? Anyone?
Well, I think your question kind of presupposes the notion that I believe in the idea of the Talented 10th in the first place. Personally, I do not. But let me share with you anecdotally why. You know, when I was hiring partner, I mean, I've been hiring partner of 2 major law firms now. And in both instances, my fight with firm management and ultimately my resignation from my last firm stemmed from the firm's unwillingness or resistance to recruit law students from Thurgood Marshall School of Law at Texas Southern University. Believe it or not. The rationale being that TSU Law School is the most diverse law school in the state. It produces incredible lawyers. I was able to print out the resumes and bios of a number of friends of mine who graduated there and gone on to do incredible things in their legal careers at different firms and whatnot. And in terms of trying to recruit the students and both lateral partners over to the firm, I met with resistance each time. So the idea of privilege, Black privilege, I guess the issue I take with the notion of Talented 10th is that it almost seems that it reserves it for a select group. In reality, my fight was bigger than trying to get Black students from UT into law firms. My fight was to increase the pipeline of Black students generally into law schools, and therefore get law students to go into law firms, thereby creating more Black law partners at these major firms. And I know I'm not alone in that fight. The idea that we fight for our individual selves, I think that may be true in some instances, and I'm sure have met with that. And one of the most frustrating things, particularly in my career, is being around some of those Negroes who prefer to be the only Black in the room, which to them, it kind of bestows a certain status of I made it. And in some ways, they're looked on as the gatekeeper of all things Black. And so they become the ring that needs to be kissed by other people who are seeking to either get into that organization or be promoted within the organization. And sadly, I've worked with too many people like that. But I think the reality is any of us, and I would say the vast majority of us who had these shared experiences from our time at the university know and understand all too well that, notwithstanding, whatever degree you come out with, the challenges that we face, in the workplace and our professions are going to be the same, whether we graduated from University of Texas or Harvard or Howard or Hampton or Houston-Tillotson. And so I think the conversation should probably evolve around or revolve around the efforts that we're taking to increase pipelines. And I know that Dr. Lewis and even Dr. Moore has spent significant time in working on pipeline initiatives. And so I truly believe that, and I believe this in my heart, that a number of us that are in these positions to where we can control, or we do have some type of influence with respect to creating opportunities, do so for the greater good, and do so because we want to create that pipeline.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Well, let me say this. Black UT grads, y'all are an interesting bunch now. Y'all don't have confidence issues at all. And so what I try to tell a lot of the undergrad students is that there are some privileges you will get because you are a Black graduate of UT. And I say you got to use it. You know what I'm saying? You got to kind of share your platform. And I told them I'm a proud HBCU alum, Jackson State University. But I understand that, the broader white America thinks a degree from UT is going to be a lot better than a degree from PV or TSU. And I told the Black UT students, you can't come up here looking down upon the folks at PV and TSU, because hell, y'all came from the same neighborhoods, went to the same high school. You know what I mean? But in a corporate setting or in a business setting, your voice may resonate just a little louder than some others. So don't be afraid to use it.
Dr. Lewis.
Yeah, just quite simply, in the spaces and places that you are, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. You just need to make sure you're taking care of those spaces. Impact change where you are, right? You don't have to necessarily be the person that's leading the movement. I think your question was, are we looking for certain people to step up? I don't necessarily think that's that's necessary, but if you are in a place of influence and a place of power, do what you know to do. That's right. Plain and simple. Also not letting the spaces and the titles that you have define who you are, be able to risk it all if it's what's right, because after all, you are educated from the University of Texas at Austin, and I'm sure that there's somebody else chomping at the bit to hire you anyway. So don't be afraid to push back, stand up for what's right, and can take control of the places and the spaces that you have power, and do what's right. So that's the only thing I'll add to that piece.
Awesome. And I kind of want to also close this particular topic, because I know there's some debate on who ascribes to the talented 10th or not. But I'm just reminded of, various prominent figures within Black culture, right? Who have their various spheres of influence. And because we live in a time of cancel culture, I don't think we can give the notion that only certain people in certain places can bring the rest of us along, because in the event they get canceled, dropped from Wild 'N Out, just in no time at all, what now? Who then has the platform to showcase upcoming talent within that sphere of influence? So
Amanda, let me ask you a question. Because I think we got an AKA on here. We got a Delta. Marlon, you an Alpha? All right. So and I'm in the Boule, so I'm putting myself in this. Has the Black Greek community let down the broader Black community? Have we been so concerned with ourselves and our organizations and our letters, right? Because you'll know, I'll charge up the Boule in a minute, and I'll charge up the Links and Jack and Jill with no problem, because we need to be held accountable. So the question is, what are Black Greeks doing beyond just their own organization?
There are a list of initiatives, most of which are along, HBCU and kind of communal things that I want to say, even Omega Psi Phi just started their own Black bank. So there are certain things that people are still ascribing to, but I do echo the sentiments of Black agency, especially within the D9 community, and Black people in general. I mean, I'm thinking about just the remnants of Willie